Hello everyone, and welcome to the Lolli and Grace Winter Bouquet video tutorial. This is a really special design because it has so many interesting components, including this gorgeous wool blend felt from Benzie Design. I love working with her wool felt. This beautiful color palette from DMC, some DMC pearl thread in a variegated green, and then this luxurious silk hand-dyed variegated green thread. It's luxurious, wonderful, beautiful to work with. There are some sparkly seed beads, and there are also some stump work berries, which just means that they are three-dimensional. There's fringe stitches, there's the hand-dyed silk thread right there, lots of French knots, all that beautiful wool felt, a lot of things going on here, a lot of beautiful texture. I did want to let you know there are going to be 3 parts to this video tutorial, so at the end of this one, make sure you check out parts 2 and 3. So I know you're excited to get started, so let's jump right in. The first step is always going to be to stretch your fabric in the hoop. And when I say stretch, I mean stretch tightly. I like a really, really tight hoop fabric because everything is more accurate when your fabric is tight. I want it to be super crazy tight. In order to keep it tight, to get it tight in the first place and to keep it tight, I always stitch on a wrapped hoop. And by that I mean I wrap the inner hoop with cotton twill tape. It comes in different widths, and you can hot glue it on the inside and just wrap it at an angle as you go around. And that way, when you put your fabric in the hoop, it allows the 2 hoops to squeeze the fabric more tightly and keep it tight as you are stitching. I just use these, not too expensive wooden hoops. And once I started wrapping my hoops, I never have any trouble with my fabric sagging. Occasionally I'll have to pull it, but not really. Honestly, it stays really tight, and I tighten my screw down a whole lot. So there's my wrapped hoops. So now that you have the fabric stretched in the hoop, it's time to transfer the pattern onto the fabric. All of my patterns are designed so that all you need to do is cut it out on the dotted line, and it will fit up inside your hoop. It'll fit in a wrapped hoop because that makes it a little bit smaller. Flip it over, put it face down on the back, line it up where you want it. I do that by holding it up to a bright light like this, shining it through, and so I move it with my fingers until it's right where I want it. And then I use tape like this to hold it in place. So all I do is I just put part of the tape on the paper, use my finger to run it right up against the side, on the side, and then on the top here like that. And then now it should stay in place. The next thing you're going to want to do is have some sort of pen to trace the pattern onto the fabric. So here are your options. Good old pencil. I never use a pencil. It's permanent on the fabric. The graphite can smudge a little bit. Never used a pencil, so no pencils for me. You can use air-soluble or water-soluble pens. For a long time, I used air-soluble pens exclusively. This is a very common one. Usually the purple means it's air-soluble. Air-soluble meaning that it disappears with the humidity in the air, any kind of moisture in the air. This one has can you see, has a slightly thicker tip, so not so great for really detailed lines. This one is called Air Erasable Fabric Marking Pen. It's by Dritz. It has a much, trying to so you can see the tip. It has a much finer tip on it, so you can get nice detailed lines. That's good. The only problem with the air-soluble markers is that they do go away if you they disappear on their own. If you live in a very humid area, these will disappear faster. I live in a fairly humid area, so sometimes I would sit down to stitch the next day and the lines would have disappeared or started to disappear, so I would just trace back over them, which is fine, works great. I did that for a long time, but sometimes you just get tired of tracing the lines every day, or if you leave it for a week or so, it's gonna be gone completely. So that's not great. There's also pens like this. This side is air soluble. This side is water soluble. Water soluble meaning that it will go away, the ink will go away with water. I don't love rinsing my hoops, so I try not to really use the water soluble, but sometimes that's a great option if that's what you like to do. This hoop cannot be rinsed, so because of the felt we're going to put on it. So the water soluble is not an option. On that note, let me digress for just a moment and say that a lot of people like to use this, let me pull it out of here, sulky stick and stitch to transfer their patterns. This is a printable interfacing. It has an interfacing on one side and it's sticky on the other side. You run it through your printer, print your pattern, cut it out, stick it on your fabric, stitch through it, rinse away this, this interfacing. This is a good option for some designs. It's not an option for this one for the very same reason, because of the felt we're going to be putting on here. And you do not want to be rinsing that wool felt because it will change texture and shrink, and that's just not going to work for this project. Good for some projects, not for this one. So the pens that I like almost exclusively now are the Frixion erasable gel pens. I say erasable because first, let me say this one's the kind that the cap pops off, comes in different colors, doesn't matter what color you use. It also comes in this clickable form, and that one's, they're the same thing. It's a 0.07, I believe, so it's a pretty good fine tip, and you can get some very detailed lines actually. I say erasable. It does erase with heat. I just take a hot hair dryer and just blow it onto the ink, and it just disappears. It's like magic. It's not, I will say it's not 100% erasable on fabric. It's not really designed for fabric. It works great. I use it all the time, but it can leave after you blow the hot air on it, it can leave a ghost line. It will leave a kind of a discolored line. On white fabric, it's harder to see, so it's really more, disappears more. Colored fabrics, it tends to leave a little bit more of a ghost line. So I always try to trace very accurately and then stitch or cover in some way the lines that I have traced on. But I do love this pen. It's really good because it does go away. So, I mean, even if it leaves a little ghost line, it's not like leaving a pencil mark or a thick black line. So let's get to the actual tracing. So I have taped this on the back. Now you can hold this up to a bright sunny window, but that works great. But what if the day is not sunny? You can also lay this onto your iPad. There are apps that are like light boxes. If you have a light box, that works great too. I don't have a light box. So what I do is I use my desk lamp, my swing arm desk lamp. Can you see that lamp right there? What I do is I'm trying not to blind you here. I turn my light on and let's see if I can get this so you can see it without blinding you. Okay, so there we go. So now when you see, when I shine this light through it, if I do not press on the fabric, you can't see the lines. Look right in here in the center. You can't see the lines very well. If I press on the paper and push that paper up against the fabric, you can see the lines very easily. So all you have to do is just shine that bright light behind your pattern, through your fabric, and trace it on. A lot of people have told me they don't like to trace. They feel like their lines are shaky or their hand's not steady and their lines come out not very accurate. One little trick that will help you is to always pull the pen towards you. You do not have to work in one long, shaky, continuous line. You can work in short sections of lines, always turning the hoop so that you're pulling the pen towards you. And let me show you, make sure you can see this. Let me show you what that looks like. So let me see, I'm going to start on this one right here. I'm going to push that paper up against the fabric, and I'm going to start here and pull towards me. Now I could come all the way around here, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to turn the hoop around, press up on the paper, come around a little further, turn the hoop again, and finish that petal. Now let's do this petal. I'm going to start up here, do one little section, turn the hoop just a little bit, do that section. Now see, this could have been a section where I could have been very shaky after I made that curve and I was trying to go that way and go away from me. Instead of doing that, I'm going to turn it, start up right where I stopped, keep turning, and finish that petal. So that's all I have to do for each of these petals. Doesn't take too long. You can see how the Frixion pen has a nice thin line. So you don't have to be afraid of tracing, or, I mean, honestly, this is how I transfer pretty much every single pattern I do, unless I'm using a fabric that is really thick or has a really strong weave to it. Linen can sometimes have a weave that's a little too strong, and there's so many lines of the weave of the fabric that it obliterates the pattern behind it, so that doesn't always work with linen. Have to use a different method. But when you're just using this nice 100% Kona cotton or something similar to it, it works great. I've used it on white fabric, obviously, light colored fabric like this gray. I've used it on medium colored fabrics, fuchsia, pink, orange. I've used it on black fabrics. As long as it's a thin enough fabric and doesn't, like I said, doesn't have that strong weave, I can see a pattern even through black fabric. So that is my favorite method of transferring my patterns onto, let me turn that. Now you can see here how well that worked and how you can have a nice clear pattern. Didn't take too long, really easy to do. All right, let's move on.
The first stitching we're gonna do on this hoop is the ferns. And this stitching is really simple, but it is especially satisfying. And why is it so satisfying? Because of the threads. The threads we're going to be using for this are the DMC Pearl number 5. It comes in a smaller size, but this is the number 5. Pearl thread is a twisted cotton. This is how I store it because it comes on these hanks, these twisted hanks like this. Like you can see, you have to untwist it to use it. And for right now, this is how I'm storing my pearl thread. So I wind it onto clothespins, and then you can unwind what you need and then clip it back into the clothespin to keep it. I just keep these in a bag for right now. The other threads we're going to be using, and these are the fun ones, are the Silken Colors silk threads from the Thread Gatherer. This one is called Green Leaves, and it's gorgeous. It's a hand-dyed variegated silk thread. It's so gorgeous. You can see the colors, you can kind of see there, and they stitch up beautifully. The neat thing about this is it is a stranded silk. So just like the regular DMC threads, the 6-stranded threads for DMC, this is stranded, so you can separate the strands out of this. But it is a 12-stranded thread. So that means whereas the DMC is a 6-stranded, this is a 12-stranded. So you get twice as much thread per yard for strands of the silk as you do for the DMC, which is good because it's more expensive. But it's a splurge, but it's so worth it. And I think you'll see that once it's stitched up. The pearl threads are not a stranded thread. So when let me show you. When it comes off of that hank, you do not separate these. It's twisted sort of like the stranded thread, the DMC stranded, but you do not separate this. You just pull it off out of that hank and you use it just exactly like that. Just thread your needle just like that. So that's something important to know. So the first thing we're going to do is use the pearl thread to stitch the stem right down the center. And let me get a disappearing, well, no, let me do this one. Yeah, let me do this one. Okay, so you're not going to stitch the stem all the way from the tip to here. I'm going to stitch from the base of the stem up to here, and I'm going to stop about right there. Because this is going to be just the silk threads right here. This is going to be more of the fern, not so much stem. So the stems only go from here to here. And I'm just using a very, very simple back stitch. One of the most basic stitches just up that stem. And the neat thing, one of the neat things about pearl thread, it is thicker, so it feels a little bit different than the stranded threads you might normally be used to using, but it has a really neat texture, visual texture to it. It's sort of shiny. You can see the twist in it. This one is actually a variegated thread, but the variegation in it is very subtle. Let me show you the whole. See how you can see it's got different colors in it, but it's pretty subtle. But it's still beautiful. It's their color variations line of pearl thread, which they're all beautiful. I love those from DMC. And so now here's my last back stitch. Very quick. And you can see how it's kind of a raise, has sort of a raised texture to it. So that'll help the stem sort of stand out from the rest of the fern leaves. So now let me secure this thread somewhere else so it'll stay out of my way. Hang on. Oops, come on. All right, now let's use the silk stranded thread. I have separated 3 strands, just like you would separate 3 strands out of a DMC thread. So this is 3 strands. All right, knotted at the end. And to do these fern leaves, it's just very random. You're just going to go, each of these little stems on the sides, you're just going to make random diagonal lines working all the way to the end. And then when you come to the last stitch, you're going to go down the center and make 1 straight stitch. So let me show you what that looks like. Really simple. I did not make each of these little lines on the pattern because it just would have been so confusing, and there's no need to have each of these little lines because it's just random. Just go at an angle from towards the closer to the tip back towards the stem, and I'm not even stitching a stem on this one. There's no reason to use up this gorgeous thread, which is expensive, on a stem because it really just ends up getting covered up by these little ferny little, whatever you want to call them, leaves, I guess. And it's okay if I go up under what you're seeing, that leaf right there, because that's going to be a felt leaf, so it's going to be, those are going to be covered up, and that's fine. That's why we're doing this one first, because I want this fern to appear like it's underneath that leaf. I work my way up towards the top, always working at an angle. Some are a little longer, some are a little shorter. Doesn't really matter what angle you're working at. And then when I get up here, you might want to have slightly shorter stitches as you get towards the top. And then the very last stitch you'll make of each little branch is 1 straight stitch that goes back towards the stem. All right, so now I'm going to hop over here. I can actually start, because this thread is expensive, I really try to use it wisely. So instead of coming from here and jumping all the way back to here, that's going to use a lot of thread that's just wasted on the back. I'm going to jump from here right over to here. So I've just made a tiny little, I've just come over a tiny little bit. So it does not matter if you start these at the stem end or the outside edge. I'm going to make a few little smaller stitches for that. And then, whoops, hang on. Oh, what have I done? There it is. And I'll make that 1 long straight one on the end there. And now I can go back down the stem. I keep catching that with my thumb. And it's as you continue to stitch, you will see the gorgeous variations in color. It's sort of subtle, but it's so pretty. These greens. Thread Gatherer just has the most gorgeous dyed threads. I love using variegated threads. Sometimes the colors are bold and really strong, have a lot of contrast, and sometimes they're like this that are very subtle, different shades of green. And they kind of look the same right now, but as I keep going, you'll see some different colors of green pop up. So as before, so now, I think one more little leaf right there. So now I'm back down here, and I don't want to jump back up here because that's a lot of thread to waste from here to here. I think I'm going to jump back to this one down here. So I'm going to do that one. Work from the stem end to the outside edge. And now you can see we're starting to get a slightly different color of green, kind of a lighter green. So I will keep working on this. I'll speed it up for you so you can see those beautiful greens kind of come to life as I do each of these little ferny stems. And I will show you that. And I'll come back when it's all done. I have finished stitching this fern, and you can see now the gorgeous variations in those greens. It was really dark over here, and then it kind of got to a lighter, and then it went to a sort of a more yellow green. These variegated threads are perfect for something like these ferns, where it just looks like the light is just sort of subtly changing on the leaf. So I love, love, love working with these threads, and particularly silk threads. They're gorgeous. You're going to really love working with them. And they're definitely worth an extra splurge every time you want to do something a little special. Okay, let's go to the next leaf. The use of wool blend felt on this design is one of the things that makes it really interesting and fun to do. Working with wool felt is wonderful. I use my wool blend felt. I get it from Benzie Design. Renee is wonderful to work with. Love working with her and her store. Beautiful colors. It feels great. So much fun to use. One of the challenges of using wool felt is how to transfer a design onto it. You could say if this was your pattern, the outline of your pattern, you could lay it on there and you could trace around it with some sort of a pen, either the Frixion pen, but because it's a little bit fluffy, you know, it has a sort of a fluffy texture to it. Fluffy isn't the right word, but you know what I mean. It's hard to get a really exact line with some sort of a pen. A pencil doesn't work. You could use a fine tip Sharpie, but it kind of gets caught on the little fibers. You can. I've done that before, and it works great for designs that are maybe a little bit larger and not too detailed, and that's okay. And then you can just cut it out. You can't see through it like you would do when we were transferring the pattern onto the hoop. Can't see through it, so you can't use that method. So here is a technique that I came up with that makes it really easy to get very detailed, very exact, accurate patterns. What I've done is I have printed my pattern onto label paper. You can buy labels that are full sheet size. You can buy them that are, all different sizes for mailing envelopes and things like that. I used a full sheet size, and I printed my designs on, and what I did was I cut them out, leaving a little bit of space around the edges. So what I'm going to do now, and so let's say I know that because of my color chart, I know that this letter S piece goes on this color of green, and this U3 goes on this bright pink color. So what I would do is I would peel the back off of this, just like that. I just sort of crimp over the edge, and then it kind of will help it pull away. But hang on, before I just plunk this down onto my felt, this is very sticky, and I want to actually get rid of some of that stickiness. I just don't need it to be that sticky. It just has to hold, long enough for me to cut it out and sort of stick to the felt, but I don't want to pull all that fuzz off. So what I do is I just take a piece of fabric. This is actually just a scrap piece of fabric, and I just sort of repeatedly, I'm trying to pick up the lint and reduce that stickiness on the back of this. Honestly, I just use my clothes. If whatever shirt I'm wearing or pants, I just sort of repeatedly just go like this onto my clothes. And I do it several times, no matter how, unless you're using like, I don't know, a cotton ball, you're just going to pick up a little bit of lint and it will reduce that stickiness. So now that I've done that, I can put it onto my felt. And see, it sticks. It's not a hard stickiness, but it sticks long enough for me to cut it out. As far as scissors, I use these kinds of scissors. This is like a small, it's just small Fiskars. I use this kind as well. This is actually meant for paper, but a long time ago I decided to dedicate it to felt and some fabric, and they've stayed very sharp, and it's good for very detailed lines. But I'm just going to use these. And one thing about felt, it's not like cutting out paper where you can go in one long continuous line and make curves, and you have to work with it just a little bit. So what I do is I try to hold my thumb right up near where I'm cutting. I chose this piece because petals are particularly just a little bit, not tricky, but you kind of got to work with it, be gentle, be patient with it. In other words, I could not cut out by starting here and make one long continuous line like this. I kind of start at the tips and work down, and I might even come back to this tip and start here and go down. You can switch directions. It takes a little bit of finesse. So hopefully you can see this. I'm just holding that sticky paper, that label paper, down next to the, and I'm going in little short cuts, especially as I go around curves, because the felt doesn't want to move as easily as, like, say, paper or just regular, if you were just working on fabric. Sometimes I will come back in like this and start back up, but a lot of times I will start at this tip and work down, start at this one and work back till I get to the point where I finished that one. But I think the more you work with it, you will sort of figure out how much leeway you can have so that it doesn't, like the paper and the sticky paper and the felt does not shift as you are cutting it. Let me just finish this one up. All right, so there's that. That one's done. Now, this one, same thing, not a little small pattern. Let me stick it on. Sometimes it wants to be a little difficult. Oh, I forgot to make it not as sticky. And you can see how this one has little bitty curves. So same thing, pressing it with my thumb. And I am making a little curve there. And then I'm starting a new cut, little curve there. A little curve there. And a little curve there, and then maybe one more. I'll start over and go around that big cut. That big curve, and then I'll start over just like that. All right, now before I rip these labels, these sticky patterns off, remember they're all marked with a letter, and some of them, like this green flower, there's only one small green flower on the entire pattern. So if I were to peel this paper off, I would know exactly which pattern piece that was and where it goes. But this one, in this bright pink flower, let me show you. In this pattern, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then there's 8, 9, 10, and there's 11 pieces of that pink felt, and you might, especially these little bitty ones, this actually goes right there. You might think you would remember once you get them all cut out, but honestly, it's much easier if you will do one of two things. For the little pieces, I leave the paper on them until I am ready to use them. I gather up all my pieces and I drop them. I don't have one with me, but I drop them down in a little baggie, or you could put them in a paper envelope if you didn't want to use a plastic baggie. But I put all my felt pieces in a baggie so they all stay together until I'm ready to use them. So the little bitty ones, the little tiny pieces, and especially like on these eucalyptus leaves, those all look alike. There's 4 here and 4 here and 4 here. Those 12 pieces will look identical if you don't leave the label on them. For some of the pieces, like the big pink pieces, you can, let's just say this is one of those pieces, you can mark the back of it. So if that was the front, I know this is S, and I can sort of make a big messy. You can see it's really hard to write on felt because it's so fuzzy. But I will mark the back of it, and that's very helpful. If you don't want to leave the sticky paper on, you can mark the back of them. But sometimes those little bitty pieces, it's hard to mark the back because they're so tiny. So either way, whether you leave the label on or you mark it, when you're ready to use it, just gently peel away that paper. And you can see how much of that fuzz was left on the sticky paper, even though we put a bunch of lint on it. And so now here's my pattern piece, and looks good. Sometimes that sticky paper will leave a fuzzy edge, so I'll take my very sharp, very accurate embroidery scissors, and I will very carefully I'm not actually trimming the felt itself. I'm really just shaving the little extra fuzzies that came up when I pulled off the backing paper. Some colors get pulled off a little bit more. I think they're a little bit softer. Some of the colors really don't need to be trimmed at all. But I'm just picky about it. I like for them to have a nice clean edge. You really probably can't even see those little pieces of fuzz coming off, but there's just kind of giving a little haircut. One more over there. All right. So there's that, and there's my pattern piece. So, like I said, just keep them organized until you're ready to use them. If you cut, and I like to cut all my pieces out before I start my entire project. That way, when I'm ready to do whatever section I'm working on, I just reach into the baggie and I can pull out the 3 pieces or the 1 piece I'm just about to stitch on, or the 3 pieces that go together, whatever. That's what I like to do, and have them all ready to go. So enjoy working with the felt. That's the easiest way to cut out patterns out of wool felt. Before we move on, I did want to mention one other method of getting your patterns onto wool felt. If you can't find the big sheets of labels, or don't have any, or don't want to buy a whole package, whatever, there is an alternate method, and it's to use this Elmer's spray adhesive. So if you print all of your patterns out onto just a regular piece of typing paper, you can flip that paper over, put this spray adhesive on, put a very light coating, test it first so you don't get big blotchy spots that are real sticky. But anyway, just spray the back of those printed patterns with this spray adhesive, and then you pretty much have made your own kind of sticky label paper. It won't be as sticky as this, so you probably will not need to, you won't need to put it against the fabric and get lint all over it, because it won't be as sticky. So you can actually cut out the color groupings before, spray each color grouping, like if you do all of the light green patterns together in one paper piece, and spray the back of that, and then when you take your green felt, put that color grouping onto the felt, and then you can cut it out just like I showed you for this. So that's an alternate way, and I've done this numerous times. I did this for a long time before I switched to using the label paper. So I just wanted to let you know that, just in case you could not find or did not want to use the sticky label paper. Next up are the sort of teardrop shaped leaves that go up underneath the peony. And it's our first time getting to work with felt, so that's really fun. I love working with felt. It just gives this such a neat dimension, and there's so many things you can do with it. This is gorgeous wool blend felt from benzydesign.com. And so I've already done these two. I've cut my felt leaves out. If you haven't watched the section of the video yet on how to cut out your felt patterns, please do that. It gives you a lot of great tips for how to get really nice, accurate patterns on the felt. And so here's my first piece. And I could just plunk this down and start stitching with the pearl, DMC pearl that we used earlier, but it's sometimes when you're stitching and you're trying to keep it in place, and even if you hold it with your fingers and you're trying to do this decorative stitching, the felt tends to want to shift. So what we're going to do to prevent that from happening is we're going to baste it with just any kind of thread. I am using this is just white sewing thread. If you've got any other color of thread, doesn't matter. You can use 1 strand, 2 strands, it doesn't really matter. It's a temporary, basting something on is a temporary stitch, big, huge temporary stitch used to temporarily hold something together while you sew it, and then those big stitches are removed later. So let me show you how to baste. So I'm going to take my leaf, put it in place right here, put it over the leaf I've already done, and of course this part will be covered by the peony petal later on. So that now it's in place. I've got my just white sewing thread, and I am going to make big, huge stitches that just sort of go around the edge. I want them to be big because they're temporary, and I want to be able to easily clip them and remove them later. And you want to put enough stitches in that it holds the piece, but not so many. You could put just one huge stitch, but I tried that on another leaf and it really kind of moved around a little bit too much. So I'm going to put in maybe one more stitch right there. All right, now that's the basting stitches. They will not get in the way of my other stitching. Next up, it's time to stitch the center vein and then these long veins on the side. Now, if you look at your pattern, you'll see where I've marked the curved vein. If you want to, you can just start stitching. If you're really picky about where things go, you can sort of, I know sometimes it's sort of hard to eye it when you're stitching, to sort of just guess what that curve is. If you have a disappearing marker, you can mark it on the felt. You have to use a disappearing marker that is air soluble, the one that just disappears on its own. You cannot use the one that's water soluble because you're not going to be rinsing this because of the felt. So if you have a air soluble disappearing marker, works great. It doesn't need to be a dark line. You could, I think, use the Frixion pen, but it's permanent until you get it hot, and I honestly haven't tried it on wool felt. Maybe I should do that, but whatever. I'm going to very lightly start at the tip. I'm going to look at my pattern so I can see kind of where that curve is, and I'm just going to make a very light line. Doesn't have to be a heavy, heavy line. All right, now let me get my pearl thread, and I am going to just backstitch the center vein. Now these first couple of stitches won't even be seen because they're going to be underneath this peony petal that will be stitched on later. But I do want these stitches to go on up under the peony. So a really simple back stitch. Let me get that right in the right place. That's all right. A little off, but that's okay. You can see I'm just ignoring the basting stitches, just stitching right over them. They're so big that they'll easily come out later, so just ignore them for now. Take that last stitch that goes out over to the tip. All right, there's the center vein. Now it's time to come back and do these veins on the side. And you know, you could mark these in, but you really, main thing is you just want to go at an angle. You don't really want your stitches to go, you know, straight out from the side. You want them to go at an angle as you go down the leaf. So there's my first one. I kind of hop back and forth the sides. Let me see. And I love the way this pearl thread has this beautiful sheen to it, and especially the way it shows up on top of the wool felt. It's just a really neat effect. Do this one on this side. You can see when I come to the edge, I'm kind of going under the felt. I don't want to go under a whole lot, but just a little tiny bit. You don't want to come off the felt, like you wouldn't go there, but you do want to come underneath just a little bit, and that'll kind of wrap around the edge of your felt. I think maybe, let me see how many stitches more on this side. Maybe one more here. I'm just ignoring the leaf that's underneath it. I don't know if I need one over here, but I'll put one just in case. Alright, I think that's all I need for there. So that leaf is finished now. I would knot it on the back, and the only thing left to do now is to remove the basting stitches. You can do this from the back as well. Sometimes it's easier to do it from the back because you're not trying to avoid clipping the wool felt. But once you get another needle to kind of pull that out, you can see how you can carefully tease that white sewing thread. See, now I'm just pulling those pieces out, and there you go. And you can see that leaf is all finished now. Super easy, right? All right, let's go on to the next leaves. The last leaves we have to work on are these eucalyptus leaves. The first step for those is to do, again, just a simple back stitch with 3 strands of just a regular DMC, stranded DMC. And I've already done that here because that's pretty simple. And the next thing we're going to do is use our little tiny pieces of felt. And I know these are a little smaller than I thought they were going to be when I designed this pattern, so sorry about that. But I have them in my baggie. I've kept the labels on them until right before I'm ready to use them. And keeping them in a baggie like this keeps them from just going astray. I also have printed out the pattern that shows me exactly which ones I'm going to use where. So I just keep that in front of me while I'm working. So the first one I'm going to do is, you can see right here, I'm going to do G. Pull it out of the bag. Get this little fiddly piece out. Peel away the sticky pattern like that. And then I always kind of trim off the sort of fuzzies, even though I did everything I could to keep that sticky stuff from being quite so sticky. I'm going to just barely trim off the little fuzzies that can sometimes happen when you peel away that. Okay, so now I have my first piece of felt. So that's piece letter G. All right, I'm going to put it on in its place, and what I'm going to use to hold each of those leaves on is 1 strand of that same color of thread, the same thread that I used on the stem. It's number 3347 from DMC. 1 strand, and unlike the big leaves down here where I basted them on, these are so tiny I didn't want to mess with the basting stitch, so I really just hold them on with 1 finger, and I'm going to start at the end of 1 leaf and just make 3 or 4 little angle stitches to hold that leaf on. come down here and just, sometimes I go straight up the middle first and pull, so that one is secure. And now I come right up in the same exact spot. Do my second stitch up in the same spot. Go across there, just fan out those stitches a little bit. Just like that. Really simple. All right, I'm going to go finish the rest of these leaves.